Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. We've got some really thought-provoking excerpts you guys sent in, and this time we're going deep on self-consistency, looking inward during uncertain times. This book, it's really speaking to something pretty profound happening with young people in China right now.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how this book, it's not your typical self-help, find yourself kind of book.
Mhm.
It brings in history, even philosophy, to explore this whole idea of self-consistency. And the way it's resonating, it's clearly hitting a nerve.
For sure. And it jumps right in, doesn't it? Like from the very beginning, it asks you to really examine your own starting point, family, where you grew up, even the era you were born into, like it all matters. It argues that this is like the core of self-knowledge. Sounds simple, but are we really doing that?
That's the thing, right? I mean, it's about recognizing that who you are today is the result of so many forces outside of your control. Like the book makes this point about how differently success is defined for young people in China today compared to, say, their parents' generation.
Hmm.
Talk about pressure.
Absolutely. And the book kind of holds a mirror up to that whole generational difference, which I think is so interesting. You know what really got me? That part about childhood dreams. They use the example of like wanting to be an astronaut who didn't, right?
Yeah.
But then realizing that maybe physically, your body's not cut out for it.
It's true. And it's not always about something as obvious as like a physical limitation. It's about looking at the bigger picture of your strengths and your weaknesses.
Mm.
It's like, have you ever really sat down and acknowledged those in yourself? Honestly.
Whoa, okay. So that's something to think about for sure. But this book, it doesn't just leave you there, right? It's not all about introspection. It's about action, too. One thing I really appreciated was how it pushes back against overthinking things, like enough with the analysis paralysis, right?
Yeah.
Just get started.
Right, right. There's this one line, it's like opportunities are discovered by trying, not by thinking. And it's so true, right? It's so easy to get stuck in our heads. But this book is like a much needed push to just get out there and experiment.
Totally. Like they even say, want to learn a new language, don't just think about it, go download Duolingo or something. And the career advice is great too. Like just take that internship, even if it seems totally random, you never know.
I know. It reminds me of this friend, we'll call him Buffet for fun. So this guy goes from law school, then to studying philosophy, and then somehow ends up with this killer career in finance. It shows that you just never know how things will connect down the road.
No kidding. What might seem completely unrelated now could end up being super relevant.
Exactly. And it all comes down to adaptability, right? So I'm curious, is there something you've been wanting to try but haven't gotten around to it? Maybe this is the sign. Don't worry, I won't judge. Unless it's like competitive thumb wrestling or something.
Hey, you never know. Now it's an opportunity. But you're right, this book gets surprisingly practical, especially when it comes to setting boundaries, which I have to say might be my favorite part. Like it really digs into why saying no is such a crucial skill, especially for young professionals. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They even give you like scripts to use. It's great. It's like they know how awkward it can be, especially when you're new to a job and you just want to please everyone. They're all about saying no gracefully, but firmly.
Right. Not trying to make it a yes in disguise. It's like learning a new language, the language of no. Like the book gives that example of the intern who pulls an all-nighter for a deadline, all because they were terrified to renegotiate.
Yeah.
So relatable.
The worst. And it all goes back to that fear of looking incompetent. Right. But the book makes this point always saying yes. It can be way more damaging in the long run.
For sure. Burnout, resentment, and you're probably not even doing your best work anyway. So it's about finding that balance.
Right.
Right. Exactly. It's not about being difficult or negative. It's about recognizing your limits and communicating them well. Speaking of, when was the last time you said yes when what you really wanted to say was no? How'd that go?
Ooh, okay, good question. I'm going to have to think about that one. On the topic of work, one thing that I found really resonated with me was that idea of not letting your career completely consume you, which the book talks about a lot. They have this line about integrating your career into your sense of self, not being devoured by it, which feels especially relevant in the context of, China's work culture.
Right. It's a really powerful distinction because our careers are important, sure, but they shouldn't be everything.
Yeah.
Right? This is where that self-knowledge piece is so important. Knowing your values, what really matters to you, so you can make career choices that actually align with those things, not just chasing someone else's definition of success.
It's about finding that internal compass instead of letting outside factors call all the shots.
Totally. And that's hard, especially today. It's like our jobs have become our whole identity. This book is saying, hey, you're more than just what you do for a living.
So true. It's about finding that balance, fulfilling work, but also a meaningful life outside of work,
Mm.
which again brings us back to self-consistency, doesn't it?
It does. It's about creating a life that just feels good on all
Ah.
levels. And it's not about being perfect in every area. It's about putting in the effort.
I love that. Okay, this book isn't all work and no play, though. It also talks about having fun, like hobbies, travel, just appreciating the little things, keeping that spark alive.
Right. That's the self-care piece.
Yeah.
Taking care of yourself mentally, physically, it matters. It's not selfish. It reminds me of that story in the book about the chef in London.
You mean the one who never learned English because he just stayed in his comfort zone,
Yeah.
mostly interacting with other Chinese speakers?
Exactly. He was so good at his job, but limited himself by not branching out, trying new things.
That's so true. It's like we can get so comfortable that we stop ourselves from growing. But kind of pulling back to the whole no thing, setting boundaries, it's not just about work, is it? The book also talks about navigating relationships in general.
Yeah, for sure. That's a huge part of it. Like, how do you communicate your needs? What are your limits? And it's not about being difficult. It's about being real.
Exactly. If you're not honest with yourself about those things, how can you be honest with the people you're in relationships with?
Totally. And that's where the book's advice gets, I think, really helpful.
Yeah.
Because it's not enough to just know what you need,
Yeah.
right? You got to be able to communicate it. And sometimes that means having tough conversations.
Right. And that's not always easy. It reminds me of that part where they talk about like positioning yourself in relationships. It's like you're creating a map, almost showing people where you stand, what you're okay with, what your boundaries are.
I love that analogy, the map, because it's about clarity, right? And honestly, that kind of clarity, it leads to more authentic relationships because
Yeah.
everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, for sure. No more guessing games or anything like that. This book is all about just direct and honest communication.
Yeah, 100%.
Mhm.
Which I think is so refreshing, honestly,
Mm.
because at the end of the day, it all comes back to being authentic, right? Like, this book isn't about fitting into some box or being someone you're not. It's about being comfortable with who you are and then letting people know, hey, this is me.
Love that. Let your freak flag fly. Okay. One more big idea I wanted to hit before we wrap up. This idea of not letting your career be everything. They say, and this is a mouthful, integrating your career into your sense of self, not being devoured by it, which honestly is easier said than done.
Oh, tell me about it. It's so easy to get sucked in, especially in a culture that's so fast-paced. Like, there's always this pressure to be on, to be hustling, you
Yes,
know?
constantly. And if you're not, you're failing. It's crazy.
Right. But this book is like a big, giant pause button on that whole thing. It's about taking a step back and asking yourself, who am I at my core? Because if you know that, you can start making career choices that actually fit you, your values, your goals. You're not just chasing someone else's version of success.
It's like finding your own internal compass instead of letting everyone else tell you where to go.
Exactly. And that's not easy. It's like we're almost conditioned to define ourselves by our jobs.
Yeah.
Think about it. You'd meet someone new, what's the first thing they ask?
What do you do?
Yeah. And this book is all about saying, hey, there's more to you than that.
So much more. So it's about finding that balance. A good career, yeah, but also a life you love outside of work, which again brings us right back to self-consistency.
Absolutely. It's about building a life that just feels good. Not just excelling in one area, but in all of them. Putting in the work in all areas of your life.
I love that. So as we get close to wrapping up here, what are some of the big takeaways that have really stuck with you?
For me, it goes back to that self-awareness piece. It's the foundation for everything. Knowing what you're good at, where you struggle, accepting all of it, and then using that knowledge to make good choices in all areas of your life.
Being real with yourself, right?
Oh.
Even the messy parts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in comparing yourself to other people or trying to be someone you're not. And let's be real, social media doesn't exactly help with that.
Oh no, that's a whole other deep dive right there.
Right. But this book, it's like a reminder to look inward, to figure out what really matters to you. It's a call to live a life that feels authentic, even when things are tough or uncertain.
Love that. So it's about defining success on your own terms, basically.
Exactly.
So good. Okay, as we start to wrap up this part of the deep dive, is there one thought you want to leave our listeners with? It's funny you should ask that because there's this one question from the book that really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah. Which one?
It asks, if your life were a business, what would your personal mission statement be?
Whoa. That's a good one.
Right? It makes you think about what you really value, what kind of impact you want to have on the world.
Totally. It's a question that can really guide your choices, big and small. from the career you pursue to the relationships you build.
And even just like the little moments you choose to savor each a day.
Exactly. It's about aligning your actions with your values, creating a life that feels purposeful and true to who you are.
So well said. And I think that's a perfect note to end on, don't you?
I think so. A real call to action for us all.
This deep dive has been quite a journey, don't you think? We've covered so much ground, from figuring out who you are to navigating work and relationships.
And it all comes back to that idea of self-consistency, doesn't it? Like knowing who you are at your core and building a life that reflects that.
It's about finding that inner harmony, that feeling of alignment between our values, our actions, our goals.
And remembering that it's always evolving, right?
Yeah.
We're always learning, always growing, always becoming more ourselves.
So true. It's been amazing exploring all of this with you.
The pleasure was all mine, really.
And to everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into self-consistency, looking inward during uncertain times.
We hope you found it insightful, maybe even inspiring, and that you'll keep exploring these ideas.
Remember, the most important journey is the one we take within ourselves.
So keep asking those big questions. Keep searching for what feels true and authentic to you.
Until next time, keep diving deep.